Well, it's a great pleasure to be back in Berlin at the FU, and I'm grateful to the Institute of Iranian Studies and Professor Kantera for the invitation, and likewise to the ISME team. If I don't know, you call yourself ISME or ISME team, and for hosting me today. Thank you so very much to you all and to the audience. The very basic goal of this lecture is to ask whether the Sasanians had preserved a memory of the Achaemenids. One, the Sasanians created a great empire in late antiquity, and the other, the Achaemenids, one in antiquity. I will get to the question of this historical memory as best as I can, but would also like to take the opportunity to see how the memory of the Iranian past, be it historical or ahistorical, continues to inflame our imaginations today. I will first talk a little bit about the terminology. Allow me to start with a brief examination of the terminology. I have taken the parentheses in the middle, in the title of the lecture series, as an invitation to instantiate an object that inherits some, but not all, the features of the class. So the title suggests that the ISME team has a twofold approach to the question. It considers the pair memory and forgetting as an essential part of the investigation, but offers the optionality of the rest. I have therefore created my own instance from the class, which informs my approach: forgetting and over-remembering Iran. I will also depart from memory and forgetting in favor of forgetting and remembering, for the latter two are opposing each other on one level and on the one and same level, while I place memory one level higher and view it as an umbrella term, encompassing both remembering and forgetting. The pair forgetting and remembering thus become sub-processes of memory, and such a distinction is, of course, not new or original, as already Aristotle sought to define the relationship between memory and recollection as that between two distinct entities. The most accessible definition by Aristotle of the pair of memory itself reads as follows: memory then is neither perception nor judgment, but is a certain state or affection of one of these when time has passed. But there cannot be memory of what is now present, as has been said. For the present there is perception, and for the future expectation, and of the past there is memory. That's why all memory involves time. Well, let's stay here first. It has previously been pointed out that Aristotle's treatment of memory approximates views of modern psychology rather than philosophy. These two perspectives, however, are not mutually exclusive, and the excursions of Aleida and Jan Assmann are good examples of the more philosophical approach to memory, or more accurately, cultural memory, the phenomenon that we are most likely concerned with today here. I'm afraid I will not have enough time to delve into the theoretical frameworks developed by the pairs of Aleida and Jan Assmann, but also note that they are widely read and received. Let us conclude then that memory, as well as remembering and forgetting, all seem to operate on the basis of time and require an object, one we can remember or forget. This is, of course, an uncontroversial view, expressed here just for the sake of clarity. There might, however, be processes that fall between these sub-processes and faculties of memory, namely over-remembering for the first and erasure for the second. As we will see, there are instances where the object of memory does not seem to have existed, but its memory does. It is this that I call over-remembering. In such instances, that time which Aristotle works with no longer seems to run in a linear manner, and memory becomes anachronistic itself. I am talking, of course, about the concept of Iran in popular imagination, often informed by scholarly discourses. I will not discuss erasure in great detail today, although older scholarship has attributed this sub-process to the Sasanians as well. It is claimed that the Sasanians tried to erase the memory of their predecessors, such as the Arsakid dynasty. I suspect that both over-remembering and erasure tap into the collective cultural memory for political reasons. In the following, I shall first outline cultural amnesia in the Sasanian era, then explore the tangible cultural legacy of the Achaemenids, that is, their inscriptions mostly, and then a brief exploration of over-remembering in modern Iran before I come to a conclusion. But before I discuss the various strata of evidence, allow me to lay out why I expand this day's examination to more than just the historical memory preserved by or lost to the Sasanians. Generations of Iranians grew up with the teaching that Iran is the only country whose name has survived more or less unchanged from antiquity through to modern days. This view and variations of it have found widespread acceptance in diverse circles. And I will show you just some of these. In a tweet, Turaj Daryai, an eminent scholar of Sasanian history at UC Irvine, explains. So I am just reading the translation of this bit here. He says, the establishment of the largest empire of ancient times, one of the most just empires in the history of the world, if an empire can be just at all, belongs to the Iranians. Cyrus the Great, its founder, changed the map of the world and for the first time in history connected Asia and Africa. So that's a modern remembering of the past. He continues his tweet by saying, quoting the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and Daryai elaborates further, with the empire of Iran, and this is, so I'm translating his text, but his text claims to be a direct quotation from Hegel. With the empire of Iran, we enter for the first time into a historical connection. Iranians are the first historical people. Iran was the first empire that expired. One more tweet from him. Finally, relying on Kellen's 2005, Daryai clarifies his position and understanding of Iran. I translate his tweet, the upper part of the tweet, this section. He says, the first person in history to call himself Iranian was Darius the Great. Adam Darayavash Arya Chisha. This is from an inscription, and he translates the inscription as such. I am Darius, an Achaemenid, a Persian, offspring of a Persian, and Iranian from the line of Iranians. That's the end of his quote. And then he says, Rüdiger Schmidt, in his translation, still Aryan, but Kellen's correctly Iranian. The article by Kellens that is being cited here runs around 20 pages, but I think that the heart of Kellens' suggestion is the following passage, where he says, the preceding discussion brings us to an inevitable conclusion. If only the Iranian word Arya and Arya is an ethnic designation and has this meaning only in the Iranian cultural context, we cannot use it in our investigations. It should neither be reproduced as it is, nor adapted into one or other modern language, but translated. So Kellen says we cannot this word as Aryan or Arish in our text, but we need to translate it. And he says the obvious translation of Arya, these are old Iranian forms of the word Aryan or Iran or Air, to which I will come later, is Iranian. So let us say goodbye to the word Aryan. So we may come back later to Kellens if you have questions of what he says. I think we have with Professor Cantera here almost an archaeologist of Kellens' trajectory, but I think we probably can agree that Kellens has a very sort of Marxist theoretical approach to history, and this is probably from that point of view. So he's trying not to advocate for Aryan really meaning Iranian, but he's trying to avoid the confusion with the word Aryan. And he is, of course, in his article very much demarcating this Aryan from the Aryan or Arya as we find it in the Vedic texts, so the old Indian texts. The advantage of this starting point is that we have multiple layers of forgetting and remembering to look at. Why? Because I was taught and still believe that the terms Iranian, Iranian kingdom, and Iran are exclusive to the Sasanians, who might have been the inventors of the term, albeit building on the old Iranian words Arya and Arya, as Kellen suggests. So let us now take a brief look at the schematic view of the textual transmission before we turn our attention to the archaeological evidence. For as we have already established, we need something in the past that we can remember, over-remember, forget, or erase in any given present time. And so I'm not going to talk about this. Initially, I wanted to talk about orality and written transmission. I'm not going to do that very much. But roughly what we have in Iranian history in terms of textual transmission is what you see here. So we have a textual transmission that starts around 1500. It continues all the way through the Sasanians, who possibly were the ones responsible for writing everything down. And so this first initial stage, this bit, is orally transmitted texts. These orally transmitted texts of the Zoroastrians are put into writing somewhere here. And remember, this is just a schematic overview. Every date there is almost a little dissertation in itself if you want to discuss it. And then we have further written transmission of documentary material that fall within these dates. And then we have the starting point of Avestan text being written, Avestan or Pahlavi text being written down. So these are the oldest manuscripts that we have within this textual transmission. Right? And this is, as I said, not very important for what I will talk about now, but just for context. So we have, if we go, perhaps before we start with the rest, just take a closer look at the maps. So this is Iran as we have it today. So the subject of today's imagination is this country, which we are told very often emerged from a larger empire of antiquity, so the Achaemenid Empire, which had roughly this vast area that it covered. And out of this, presumably 500 years later, emerged the Sasanian Empire, and this has roughly a very similar sort of expanse, whereby what you see here, this part is proper Sasanian geography, and what you see on this side is roughly Roman areas that Sasanians controlled at some time. And the bits I am interested today mostly is a little place here. I don't know whether you can read it. It's called Nakhsh Rostam. This is southwest of Iran today, close to Shiraz and close to Persepolis. So let us now take a look at a schematic view of the textual transmission before we turn our attention to the archaeological evidence that we already did. And we have, when it comes to the Sasanians, we have little textual evidence that shows how Sasanians viewed their past. The archaeological evidence is almost our first entrance when we want to discuss cultural memory, and most of the studies about the Sasanians' cultural memory are bound together with this site, Nakhsh Rostam. What you have in Nakhsh Rostam is a rock face with four structures that you see here. These are Achaemenid tombs of Achaemenid kings, and that's the reason why this site is very often discussed as a necropolis. And below these Achaemenid structures, you have some Sasanian reliefs, which suggest Sasanians somehow sought to connect themselves with the Achaemenids. So I will just very briefly delve into this. So just so we understand the archaeology of this site a little bit. So this is the rock face, and then we have here at the bottom left corner another structure which is called Nakhshe Rostam, Kabe Zartosht. And this is also an Achaemenid building structure of which the usage is not very clear, but we have Sasanian inscriptions written on this, which I will very briefly discuss as well. So if you look at this sort of schematic overview of the site, you have a Sasanian fortification around here, which is barely visible today. Then you have here the oldest tomb. This is Darius I. This is the one of whom Turaj Daryai in the previous tweet claimed that he was the first person to call himself Iranian. Then you have three more tombs here, and then down below the Sasanian reliefs. This site has been studied very carefully by Professor Canepa, who has tried to establish a link between what the Sasanians do and what the Achaemenids do, and to see whether there is any connection between the two, whether the Sasanians are trying to claim a hereditary link between themselves and the Achaemenids, or whether they are just using the site for the sake of the connection with an older tradition. What is very important for me is that the founder of the Sasanian dynasty, Ardashir I, carves his relief here. So in none of the photos that I show here, you can actually see that far. So it's way outside the Sasanian fortification that we see around here. And just again for context, so we have here the tombs, Darius I, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Darius II, here Kabe Zartosht, and then we have the Sasanian reliefs. And if you look at this little corner here, that's where Ardashir I put his relief in, and this is his. So I just invite you to take in the visual impression of this relief, which shows the king on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have the deity Ormazd, and he is giving the king the diadems or signs of kingship. And you can see it's a very close sort of symmetry between the two figures in this photo, in this image, and both of them have their adversaries underneath their horses, and the horses look very much similar, and so on. But so this is Ardashir I, the founder of the Sasanian dynasty, and then we have one by his son Shapur I, and he is here celebrating his victory over the Roman king Valerian, and the other one is, I believe, Philip the Arab, who is being subjugated. And just again for context, I will go back. So this is the one by Shapur that I showed you in black and white, and Ardashir is way outside. You cannot see it in any of these photographs. And if we then go back to the Achaemenid structures, and if you just try to take in these three newer tombs, you will see there is almost no visual link between the two. So nothing of the visual impression of these Achaemenid tombs links them to the Sasanian reliefs, at least very little. And down below you see the Sasanian structures. And this is the tomb of Darius I, the oldest one on this site. Again, you have here a little relief and barely anything that repeats itself in terms of visual features. And if we go a little bit closer to it, it's not very well visible, but here you have the figure of Darius I. He is standing in front of a fire altar, and then he is standing on top of a throne, and the throne has beneath it a number of smaller people who are carrying this throne. I will come back to this as well when we discuss the textual features. So studying all this, and this site has some other structures in it that suggest there was possibly the site was used for ritual purposes. We don't know which rituals, but people have tried to suggest that the link between Sasanians and Achaemenids might be defined by sort of a type of religious continuity which would bring in together rituals. And Canepa, in his discussion of this site, says Ardashir I and Shapur I not only fashioned a new vision of the past, but also innovated a repertoire of memory practices that inspired the activities of their successors. The founders of the dynasty used these techniques to reconstitute and reanimate the awe-inspiring yet half-understood monumental patrimony of Pars, weaving together old and new sites, rituals and images, as well as creating a vital new site of memory such as Ardashir and Bishapur. In the conclusion of his study, he says, Ardashir and Shapur I established precedents that heavily influenced the next century and a half of Sasanian memory practices. Their successors inherited from them both an experience of Achaemenid and Sasanian monuments and visual traditions as thoroughly fused, and a wider Persian topography of memory inflected by rock reliefs and grand cities. While I think the observations are very perceptive, I must reject the link if he suggests any links between the Sasanians and the Achaemenids. There is barely anything that links these two together. But what is true is that there is a link established with an unknown past, I would claim, and it has been, these activities, these Sasanian reliefs have been, of course, very much influential for what came after them. So there is a new tradition being established, so I would not use verbs such as reanimate, because then you are actually reanimating something. That's not true, but they are establishing a new tradition that continues further, but the link to the past is very, very weak. So with that, perhaps we can move to some Sasanian textual evidence where these links with the past are discussed. Again, I apologize, so it's all nothing new for the experts, but very brief look. So there are a number of accounts that discuss the transmission of the Avesta from Zarathustra, the founder of the religion, down to the Sasanian times. As I said, there are a number of them, but I will look at two of them here. And this one that I will look at first is from Dinkard 4. Dinkard is a Middle Persian text, a compendium put together in its final form in the 10th century, but it discusses various points, knowledge connected to the religion of Zoroastrianism. And if you analyze this passage in the Dinkard 4, you find two types of actors. One are the priestly actors, and there I can only identify two. One is Tansar or Tosar, a priest that is purported to have been active at the time of Ardashir, and so the first Sasanian king, and then Adulbadi Maharaspandan was active during the reign of Shapur II. You see his regnal dates on the slide. And then we have, so I will just skip all this perhaps. Both priests are also known from other Middle Persian texts. That was the point of those two slides that I skipped. And then we have the royal actors. So the first one was Vishtasp, who received the tradition or the religion directly from Zarathustra, the founder of the religion, and made sure that it is distributed among other tribes at the time. And there is so very clear reference to scripture. The second was Darai Darayan, who deposits 2 copies of the Avesta, the sacred scripture of the Zoroastrian, for safekeeping. And then we have Valakhshi Ashkanan. He is presumably an Arsakid king who orders the collection and memorization of the remains of the Avesta. And then we have a set of further kings who are all Sasanian kings. So with the first one, Vishtas, we have a, let's say, prehistoric king. Darai Darayan is supposed to be an Achaemenid king. It's very often, at least, the common opinion that this is probably a reference to the Achaemenids, and we will see in a bit why. And it is presumed that Dara is a Middle Persian form perhaps of Darius or Darayavash, the Achaemenid name of the king, of this Darius the first that Turaj Daryai claimed was the first Iranian to use the term Iranian. And the rest of them, so Valakhsh is the Arsakid king, and then we have from there onwards a collection of Sasanian kings. And here perhaps the most important part is the memorization of the remains of the Avestag under the third point, Valakhshi Ashkanan, because presumably this is the time after Alexander, and Alexander is often associated with the destruction of the Zoroastrian tradition in writing as well as in oral transmission. So let's take a look then at the text where Darai Dariayan is described. And in this Denkard 4 passage, that's all we find. So Darai, son of Darai, ordered the safekeeping of 2 written copies of the entire Avestag and Zand, just as Zardusht, the prophet, had received them from Ormazd, the deity, one to be kept in the royal treasure, presumably treasure, that's why it's in italics, one in the fortress of writing. So that's all this text tells us about Darai Darayan. So we can, based on this text, not identify this person as Achaemenid at all. And in fact, various theories have been put forward for the identification of Dara as possibly not an Achaemenid king, but a pre-Sasanian local king. We don't need to concern us with that. I would like to move to Arda Viraznamak, another Middle Persian text, where the history of the transmission of the Avesta is also recounted. So they say in that text, thus they say that once the just Zardosht accepted the religion, he propagated it in the world. That would be the time of Vishtas, as we had it before. For 300 years, until the time of completion, the religion remained in that state of purity and people in certainty. So certainty means here they were certain about their own religion and religious knowledge. And then the hateful Ganag Menoi, that's the adversary of the deity, so basically evil, the sinful one, in order to make people doubt this religion, deceived that accursed Alexander the Roman. Alexander the Roman is our Greek Alexander, they call him Alexander the Roman, who was dwelling in Egypt, who came to Iran Shahr with heavy might and fighting and illness. And he struck down the ruler of Iran, and he destroyed and ruined court and kingship. And this religion, that is the entire Avestag and Zand, arranged on cowhide and written in gold, had been put in Babak's stakh at the fortress of writing. And that evil, unfortunate, heretic liar, the evildoer of Alexander the Roman, who was dwelling in Egypt, he brought and burned it. And he killed many of the religious authorities and judges and teacher priests and believers and skilled and knowledgeable ones of the land of the Iranians. And he incited hate and enmity in the midst of the great ones and the local rulers of the land of the Iranians. Then he destroyed himself and ran to hell. So the text has certain difficulties, but if you forget about sort of the philological discussion, the message seems to be very clear. Everything was destroyed by Alexander, and we received nothing of the religion, or very little, as even, so the text itself was burned, and all the religious authorities, and they name various of them, were all killed. So that means that's a pretty dark scenario that's being painted, and seems to point towards a break in the tradition. So if there is any textual evidence in the Sasanian material, it rather points to a lack of a historical memory, or that historical memory of devastation and destruction, but not necessarily of the greatness of the Achaemenids. And we also cannot know how much they knew about the type of knowledge and its existence among the Achaemenids. So perhaps we can then move to Achaemenid textual evidence. I will first quote a couple of passages from the Bisutun inscription, of which you see a picture here. Again, so the only shared link between this imagery and what we saw of the Sasanians is that the main adversary is underneath the king, but other than that, very little that is being shared here. And then here you have again the king, his main adversary, his main foe, and then the rebels that he captured and killed. The inscription is trilingual, and we will now take a look at some of the passages from it to see what the Achaemenids say about themselves, how the word Aryan possibly is used here, and whether it can easily be replaced by Iranian. So he says about himself, I am Darayavash, this is Darius I, the great king, king of kings, king in Persia, king of the lands, and I think it's important that he calls himself king of the lands, or we can translate king of the countries if you want, son of Vishtasp, grandson of Arsham, and Achaemenid. So he has three designations for himself. One is he's an Achaemenid, so that is his dynasty, his lineage, that's very clear. He is king in Persia, so he is a Persian king, not an Iranian king, and he's king of the lands. So he does not refer to his kingdom or empire by any words. He doesn't use any designation for it. Then he says, this is how every paragraph almost begins in this inscription, says Darayavash the king, I am king according to Ahura Mazda's wish. Ahura Mazda gave me the kingship. So this is Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd is the deity that is known from the Zoroastrian texts, and so he claims a kingship by divine right of some sort. Then he continues and says, these are the lands that became mine. I was king according to Ahura Mazda's wish. And then I'm sorry I didn't translate the names into English, but so he counts all the countries that he has, or lands that he has conquered, and at the end he says, all in all 23 countries. But then again, when he discusses this, he says, these are the lands that became mine, but they did not become part of Iran Shahr, or anything similar to that, but it's just an enumeration without any self-designated or indigenous name for this domain, or dominion, sorry. And then he says about his inscription, says Darayavash the king, this is the Aryan version of the inscription, and this would be one of the passages we can have a discussion. Is it Aryan or Iranian? You can always translate Aryan in these instances with Iranian, and it will be all right. This is this word, Arya, and very often people do translate it as Aryan, but this is the part where Kellen says this should be translated Iranian, and then Daryai says because of that, this is all Iranian kingdom. Which I added by the will of Ahura Mazda. It was also put down on clay and parchment. I also added the names, and I added the family tree, and it was written down and read before me. Thereupon I sent this version of the inscription everywhere in all principalities. The people cooperated. Again, it's principalities and so on, but there is no mention of any country by name. Now, I suggested we will come back to this tomb of Darius. So this is Darius I, and he has, again, just for repetition, it's himself here, the fire, and you have little figurines here, and there is some text around this inscription, from which I would like to read another passage. So here, we are back in Nakhshe Rustam, where Sasanians try to connect themselves with some unknown past, and he says about himself, the great God is Ahura Mazda, who created this earth, created that sky over yonder, created people, created happiness for the people, made Darayavash king, one over many, one lord over many. This is almost as good it could be from Lord of the Rings, one to rule them all. This is almost here. And then he says, I am Darayavash, the great king, king of kings, king of the countries with all tribes, king on this vast earth and beyond. Again, he keeps referring to his large empire, but never with any particular name that he could have had. And he says again, I'm son of Vishtasp and Achaemenid, a Persian, son of Persian, and this is again the passage that Turaj Daryai liked, an Aryan of Aryan descent. I will leave the discussion here just as it is. It is, in my view, it is Aryan. In other people's views, it is Iranian. But we may come back to this. Then he continues and says, should you now wonder, and this, so he basically is now changing perspectives. So you, reader of this inscription, should you wonder, how many are those countries that Darayavaush the king held in possession? Then look at the figures that carry my throne. That's the image that I showed you before. And he says, you will then recognize, you will then realize, the lands of the Persian man has traveled far. Then you will realize the Persian man has defeated the enemy far from Persia. And this is a thread that runs through his inscription. Again and again, there are references to the Persians. When he says who helped him, they are all either Persian or of Median descent. So the inscription is very much dominated by Persians and Medians as supporters of Darius, but also among them lots of rebels against him, and then you have the foreigners that he captures and conquers. But nowhere does he refer to any larger construction of a dominion, of an empire, or anything by name. And when he tries to sort of exaggerate or show the beauty of his conquest, then he is always referring to Persia. And I would very strongly argue and suggest that within the Achaemenid textual evidence, we find, at least under Darius I. I mean, Darius I was, in my view, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, not Kurosh, as very often is claimed, because he is the one, I see heads shaking, we will have a discussion after that. But in my view, I'm not saying that Kurosh was unimportant, but the thing is, we have almost nothing left from Kurosh. But from Darius, we have almost a manifesto on this, in this inscription and elsewhere. And it's very clear when you read this guy was interesting. And I think a man with such a vision, and he goes again and again, he addresses the readers of the inscriptions again and again, and tries to anticipate the questions they may have, and answers them for them. So that he would not ever refer to an empire by a name, I think is significant. And I think what he constructs here, if we want to use designations and names from today to the past, he developed an ethnic identity, and that was the identity of the Persians. And he was a Persian, as he very clearly says, but he says, by lineage, I am Aryan. So we continue. So I now switch to Sasanian inscriptions, so some Sasanian inscriptional textual material to gauge against what we have seen so far. So I showed you the picture of Ardashir I with the two horses and the beautiful symmetry, and that relief has at least two inscriptions. One designates the deity Ormazd as Ormazd, and one tells us who Ardashir is. And that inscription is this one. It says, this is the image of his Mazda worshipping majesty, Ardashir, the king of kings of the Iranians, whose lineage is of the gods. Not the lineage of the gods is from, not the lineage of Iranians is from the gods, but he's talking about his own lineage, and he says, so my lineage is from the gods. I am the son of His Majesty King Babak. And this is more or less typical for everything Ardashir has left behind. So if we look at this inscription, which is trilingual again, so we have here Shahan, Shah-e-Iran, so that's the king of kings of what I translated Iranians. Older scholarship always says king of kings of Iran. And this is an important distinction. In the Parthian version, it says Shahan Shahi Arian, and in the Greek one, he says Basileus Basileon Arianon. Now, Iran is, the way we understand it today, Ir is a development from Old Persian Arya, as we had it in the article by Kellins, or Airia in the Avestan text, and so that develops to Ir, and the dictionaries give the meanings noble and hero, if you want to just take it as a noun, and the an ending is an oblique plural, which would usually suggest it's something like of someone. Then you have of the heirs, and we very often translate it of the Iranians, of the heir ones. And this seems to be underlined and supported by the Greek translation, where you have Arianon, which is again a genitive plural, which suggests of the Iranians and not of Iran. Right? Would you agree? Yeah. So, again, heir is most likely an ethnic designation and definitely not the name of the country here. But in a minute, I will go one step further and say we see the development of heir from ethnic identity in Achaemenid times to a national identity, if we can call it that. So then we have Shapur, the second Sasanian king, Ardashir's son, where we have, I read it in proper Middle Persian as it were, Shahan Shah, Iran Ud and Iran. So he says king of kings of Iranians and non-Iranians. So this is new. So this an Iran or non-Iranian never occurs under Ardashir, the first Sasanian king, but it comes in with Shapur the first, who apparently sort of expands the Iranian boundaries and then has also non-Iranians as part of his kingdom. And we saw this Kabe Zartosht. And if you don't mind, I will just go back very briefly. I should have added that picture here too. So this is the Kabe Zartosht, this structure. And I said there is an important inscription here. That important inscription is by Shapur I, the second Sasanian king. And he has on this side the Middle Persian version, the Greek version, and then he has a Parthian version on this side of the Kabe Zartosht. And it is this bit that I am interested in. So here Shapur says about himself, and Iran Shah Khwadayhem, I am the Lord over the dominion of the Iranians. And this is the bit where we have Iran Shah. So there is a Parthian version which more or less says the same thing. Arian Shah Khwadayhem, I am the Lord over Iran Shah, Arian Shah. So, again one German thing bit left. And then we have the Greek translation here, which says Arianon, which we saw before, ethnos. And this is often translated as a nation of the Iranians. You can use perhaps another word. The suggestion here is that this Greek translation of the Parthian and Middle Persian text, which is otherwise very accurate and very good, how is it explainable that it deviates all of a sudden from an Iran Shah, the dominion of the Iranians, to a nation of Iranians? And one suggestion has been that this word occurs here for the first time and therefore throws off the Greek translation. Now, be that as it may, in the relative chronology of what we have for Middle Persian words and texts, this seems to be the first attestation of the word Iran Shah. So we have here all of a sudden an expansion of Iran under Ardashir to Iran and non-Iran under his son, and then all of a sudden he is also the king of Iran Shah, the dominion of Iranians. And it is this Iran Shah that in term of time then turns into Iran, Iran Zamin, Iran, and the name of the country today. But in all these Middle Persian contexts, it's always of the Iranians, and even here is Iran Shah is not the name of the country as such, but it just says the dominion of the Iranians. And that's why I want to suggest that what we possibly had under Achaemenids as a national identity, as an ethnic identity, turns into a national identity. So almost national identity politics by the Sasanians. And I have quite often explained it to myself as such. The Achaemenids did not have one particular adversary. So they tried to conquer as much as they can. They had many enemies. They conquered many countries, but they made also some friends. I mean, we know that Cyrus is celebrated for his various deeds, not only by Iranian nationalists, but also by believers in other religions. And the Sasanians had a very binary situation. Now we have an expert here, amidst the audience, at least one. I mean, there are many, but Stefan Hertel, who has worked on the Bactrian texts and background, we know that Sasanians had also lots of enemies in the east. But their politics very often was dominated by their opposition to the Romans. And I very often think that perhaps this opposition, with a formed and almost overwhelming force in the West, which cost the Sasanians and made lots of headaches and cost them some portions of land and some population, perhaps triggered and supported this move from an ethnic understanding to an almost national identity kind of a politics, where all of a sudden you had very clear boundaries of Iranians and non-Iranians. I don't know whether I believe it myself very much, but that's at least one way of explaining it. So if you don't mind, allow me to just have a... So we have here the sort of structure and the development of the archaeological textual evidence on the one hand, and then the interpretations by some scholars on the other. And within this sort of pot of conflicts, there is, of course, the name of Iran and the glory of Iran and the glory of the ancient Iran and Zoroastrianism and the kings and particularly Cyrus the Great, who everyone seems to love, has also other developments. And I wanted to take a very brief look at the development of an student of Iranian studies who came to France first, Dawood Monshizadeh. He received a grant from the Iranian government, traveled to France in 1931. As you all know, that these are sort of difficult times in Europe, and he is not very successful in France, particularly I think because of he seems to have been someone from a sort of a intellectual background. He travels to France and does not feel very well there, and is more sort of attracted by the German climate of a non-colonial past as compared to France, apparently. So in 1937-38, somewhere around then, he moves to Germany. Not much is known about him. There are apparently a couple of books that were published in Iran. I didn't have access to those. I have compiled these, so some of the dates could be, you need to be a bit more liberal and accept 1 or 2 years inaccuracy here. And then he moves to Germany. He studies in Munich first, and then he moves to Berlin. He studies Indology with Walter Wüst. He gets also into various other difficult circles of professors in Berlin, and defends his PhD thesis in 1943. And then he starts as a lecturer for Persian in Munich first, and there is a suggestion that he had as assistant a certain Traudl Junge. Is she a name? Right, to the other rest of the audience. You know who Traudl Junge is? Yeah, So for those who don't know, if this information is correct, Traudl Junge is the assistant of Adolf Hitler, who was with Adolf Hitler in the bunker and helped him very much and stayed with him, and then left, and later apparently became an assistant of Monshizadeh. So some of you might have some uneasy feeling. It will get worse. So then at some point he returns to Iran, and in 1951 or 52 he established a party which calls itself Sumka, in Persian, Hezb Sosyalist Milli Kargaran Iran. The abbreviation is based on this, but so as a National Socialist Workers' Party of Iran, and I think latest by this name you should start to shake. And in 1981 he publishes an edition. This is why we in our Iranian studies from our corner know him, because he edited a Persian epic text called the story of Zarir. Is an epic text which is published in 1981. So he goes to Iran. He becomes very active as part of this Sumka group. He supports certain ideas and is then one of the main forces against the nationalization of oil in Iran, but not in itself. He becomes a very forceful enemy of Mossadegh, and he is the one who is very much also behind bringing that government down. Also okay? And so he took from Germany certain things, and one of them is the flag of the. So everyone, yeah, see, I told you, you will be scared. It will get worse. So this is the flag of his party. I don't need to explain anything here, I guess, but I will show you some pictures. There are not many pictures of him, but some of you have seen it. So this is him giving a lecture in Iran. Yes, that's a very valid question. Yes. So, and just so you know that I am not joking, another one. And he is renowned for the fact that he loved the Hitlergruß. It was very important to him, and everyone had to engage with it. And he was also a firm believer in military actions. And at some point, he had around 100 people who would go onto the streets and beat up communists. That was one part of his ideology, beating people up, pogroms. And here you can see him again. And you see he's using a cane. This is because he did, in fact, he was a recognized member of the SS, and he fought in the Second World War. He went to the front and he was injured, and I suppose this cane and support is because of that injury. Yes. It's a very strange word, yes. But although I think he is very clear in his, no, that's all right, in his message and his, political identity, there is almost nothing left to describe. You just show the pictures and everyone knows. But he was not the first, and he was unfortunately not the last. So we have here a newspaper which calls itself Iran Bastan, Ancient Iran. And I will zoom in a little bit. It is from 1932. So it is before Sumka and Monshizadeh. And it says something newspaper, political and economic stuff is all fine. And then it says this special issue, which is dedicated to the memory of Iran Mashrute, so the democratic Iran that came from the Qajar time, is a gift to the sacred position of Humayun Shahanshah Pahlavi. So this is dedicated to the Shah of Iran as a sacred personality. And so there's a little bit here around you can read, but none of that is that controversial. But of course, the swastika shows again where all this ideology comes from. Right? So we are in Iran very firm believers that swastika is part of our national identity. And you will find many Iranians who claim this and say this is what it is. There are two Aryan nations, one of the Indians, and we are the other ones. Indians have the swastika and we had it too. But I do not need to remind you that it can all go very wrong, right? So we can have some. And anyway, the position of swastika among the Iranian visual evidence is very problematic. So I tend to not talk too much, and I think with this I have come to the conclusion of this lecture, and I will go back to my papers and read a little bit. So the initial version of this lecture dedicated more time to a theoretical consideration. I shortened it to oblige with the goals of the series and to represent Iranian studies rather than historiography. At the core of the theoretical part was the question, or would have been the question, what history means to us as people, philologists, and historians. Presenting evidence is but a small part of historiography. Interpretations along the lines of disciplines such as archaeology or art history are important but do not exhaust the potential of historical analysis. A year ago, I explored Nietzsche's predilection for aphorism to see whether this short format and his approach offer viable alternatives when we engage with the past. I have found in Walter Benjamin's aphoristic writings another refreshing perspective that challenges conventional modes of thinking. In number 16 in his Über den Begriff der Geschichte, or on the concept of history, Benjamin invites us to reflect on history as a construct. He says history is the object of a construction whose location is not the homogeneous and empty time, but that which is filled with here and now, his Jetztzeit. For Robespierre, the Roman antiquity was a past charged with the here and now, which he blasted out of the continuum of history. Benjamin elaborates further that it is not enough for a historian to understand and replicate causalities. In other words, for Benjamin, it is the engagement in any present time that creates the past and its causal relationship with the present. Thus, it is the job of a historian to grasp and comprehend the constellation of the historian's present time with the past. And indeed, examinations of cultural memory and amnesia, the goals of this lecture series, beg us to ask bigger questions. The denazification of Ukraine is not just a political agenda, it's not even a term. It's a powerful reference to the events of the last century and a theatrical staging worthy of a Shakespeare, but with real and very unpleasant consequences for certain people and for us all. Likewise, the invocation of the glory of ancient Iran is not just a randomly chosen point of reference, but a cultural powerhouse that does not seem to run out of currency. Monshizade's political party had a short life of 6 or 7 years. It was dissolved in 1958, but it has not disappeared, leaving a legacy of normalizing militarism and perhaps even Aryanism behind. The amount of hate and pressure exerted by Iranian nationalists on social media platforms is truly frightening. A number of academics contribute by providing a so-called reliable historical context. And opposition is futile, as you will be subjected to unbelievable defamation and hate. The definitions of love and affection for Iran, in whose name the pogroms are undertaken, are in my view random, but the severe reactions are not and seem calculated. I do not need to remind you that our societies are more divided than ever. I do not need to remind you that the violence, symbols of hate and destruction, that even genocide have been normalized. All I can do is to remind myself of Walter Benjamin's reflection number 6 on the concept of history, the same text, which is a bit longer, but I don't mind reading it. He says, to articulate what is past does not mean to recognize how it really was. It means to take control of memory as it flashes in a moment of danger. For historical materialism, it is a question of holding fast to a picture of the past, just as if it had unexpectedly thrust itself in a moment of danger on the historical subject. The danger threatens the stock of tradition as much as it does its recipients. For both, it is one and the same, handing itself over as the tool of the ruling classes. In every epoch, the attempt must be made to deliver tradition anew from the conformism which is on the point of overwhelming it. For the Messiah, arrives not merely in the Redeemer, he also arrives as the vanquisher of the Antichrist. The only writer of history with the gift of setting alight the sparks of hope in the past is the one who is convinced of this, that not even the dead will be safe from the enemy if he is victorious, and this enemy has not ceased to be victorious.